12 days by Russian Wolf 7. Day 9. They hadn't sat with the Slytherins for lunch or dinner, and Harry was wondering how intentional that was. Did they only gravitate toward each other at breakfast, because that's when packages arrived? Or did the other students happen to sit in a way that prevented any contact? Were they only capable of standing each other's company for one meal, and couldn't bear any further contact? Or was it that Pansy didn't wave them over during lunch and dinner? "You're enthusiastic for so early in the morning," Ron said blearily, sitting in the seat opposite her.
"I may not be getting my own gifts, but I'm living vicariously through Draco's,"
she said cheerfully. "Does that mean you're not going to try to steal them anymore?" Malfoy asked sullenly.
"Of course not," she replied. "But you did let me help with the tentacular potion, so if you get something else we could share, I'm happy."
Malfoy rolled his eyes. "You chopped ingredients for 2 hours."
"And afterwards, you gave me a draught of the potion," she said. "I'll chop anything you want if I get—"
"Shut up!" Malfoy whispered. "The professors are right there! Do you know how much trouble we'd be in?"
"I wasn't going to say what it was," she huffed. "You never trust me."
Harry's stomach was twisting. Yes, of course he'd gotten the tentacular leaves legally. It hadn't occurred to him that most of their uses were against school rules. Whatever they had made was his fault. "When you go out of your way to inform me, you'll be blabbing all my secrets to my sworn enemy. I have no reason to," Malfoy replied irritably. His stomach worsened. Sworn enemies, of course. Sworn enemies who were participating in a brief truce and happened to share a few meals together. Just sworn enemies and nothing else. "You're in a mood," Harry said, sounding rather touchy himself. "Couldn't sleep." Pansy smirked.
"He was up all night because he's besotted. He didn't even get into bed until 4.
"I am not!" Malfoy snapped. "Merlin, Pansy, you were up too, complaining about Blaze. I couldn't think about anyone else even if I wanted to, not with your nagging."
"Well, he hasn't written me once," she pouted. "And it's Monday. He promised he'd write every day."
"I'm not going over this again," he muttered. "If you want to date a prat, fine, but don't rub it in my face." Harry was stuck. He couldn't move past besotted. He understood conversation had continued past that, but he hadn't heard it. Malfoy liked someone enough to lose sleep over it, and he was gay. The conversation had a very clear direction it needed to proceed in, and Harry was going to make it happen. "I can't imagine you besotted, Malfoy," Harry said with a slightly arrogant smirk. He waited for the cake from Ron, and it didn't come. So far, so good. "I'm not, so don't strain yourself," Malfoy replied. "Pansy gets grand ideas and doesn't know when to shut up about them."
"When have I ever been wrong about who you fancy?" she asked. "Merlin, I knew you were gay before you did."
"There's a difference between maybe slightly fancying someone and being besotted," he said. "And you have been wrong. Remember that—" He winced. "You know what I'm talking about. The thing 5th year."
Pansy smirked. "I do know, and I wasn't wrong. He just left before you could get in over your head."
"It was one incident," Malfoy said. "One thing that might have sort of got my attention were it not enacted by such a...
Weasley?"
Pansy suggested sweetly. Harry choked on his toast. Ron spit out a mouthful of orange juice. Malfoy turned it bright red. Pansy giggled. "I never had a crush on a Weasley!" Malfoy yelled. "Bloody Merlin, stop looking at me like that! I didn't! I never will!" And he added, whirling on Pansy, "I've never had a crush on a professor now, have I?" Pansy stopped laughing.
"You wouldn't,"
Malfoy smirked. "Oh, I absolutely would! Can we consider the conversation over, or must I completely and thoroughly humiliate you?" She glared at him.
"Fine, never mind."
"No!" Ron said indignantly. "No, never mind. This is my family we're talking about. It could be me for all I know." Malfoy made a gagging sound. "It will never, ever be you. And no matter what that idiot says, it will never, ever be a Weasley. Like I said, there was a single incident that may have intrigued me had it not been one of your lot. But it was, and I was not intrigued, and that's the end of it." "Fred and George," Hermione said suddenly. "The spectacle when they left."
That's all I can think of from 5th year that might intrigue you. I can hardly blame you for fancying one of them. They are quite...
She got off at the look Ron was giving her.
I don't fancy George. I was just saying it's not that hard to see why someone else might.
I'm done with this conversation, Ron said firmly. Thank you, Malfoy muttered. And if you were curious, Pansy was obsessed with one Severus Snape for years. She hit Malfoy.
I was not.
Malfoy just smirked to himself as Pansy defended herself, and Harry tried to come to terms with what had been said. Malfoy had fancied one of the Weasley twins? Because they exploded a bunch of fireworks in Umbridge's face, in his own face actually, because he was on the Inquisitorial squad. So, Harry would have to do something flashy that humiliated Malfoy? That didn't seem right. Then again, Malfoy fancying a Weasley was a far cry from alright. Post, Harry announced dumbly. Not only had Malfoy fancied a Weasley, but he fancied someone now. That couldn't be good. There was no way he'd already liked Harry. If it was even possible, he'd have to be persuaded. That was the whole point of the gift giving, to persuade him. If he was already emotionally involved with someone, there was virtually no chance of convincing him otherwise. He watched absently as Malfoy unwrapped his gift. The gift that didn't matter because Malfoy already fancied someone. What was it that he said? Maybe slightly fancying someone? That might not be the end of the world. Maybe he could still be convinced otherwise. Or maybe he'd be too busy thinking of this someone to entertain even the notion of someone else. Maybe he'd need to see if whoever it was fancied him back before he'd sink to even considering Harry. Also a Weasley? Really? Yes, it was practically impossible not to be attracted to the twins, but, well, Malfoy? Really? Harry wasn't anything like the twins. If that was Malfoy's type, he was screwed. Should he have gotten him a gift or two at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes? That had seemed so unlikely at the time, but maybe he'd missed a big opportunity. No! Malfoy exclaimed, and Harry focused himself. Did he really not like his gift that much? He thought it would be useful. Maybe not romantic, but useful. Feeling extra entitled this morning? Harry said irritably, and maybe a little hurt. He focused on the irritability. Not what you wanted? No, it's bloody perfect! Malfoy said, turning the stirring rod over in his hands. I've only brewed with tungsten with Snape. He looked sad for a moment, then shook himself. No, it's that it would have been perfect for yesterday's potion. He dropped his voice. I went through 4 of Slughorn's glass stirrers. Merlin, whoever's doing this is daft. Tools before ingredients, really. Okay, insulted and complimented at the same time. That was about on par for Malfoy. Maybe they're just not into potions, Harry suggested, so it didn't occur to them. Malfoy rolled his eyes. Clearly.
Yet again, I told you so,
Pansy said.
It couldn't be her. No self-respect in Slytherin isn't into potions.
You've made your point, Malfoy snapped. Repeatedly. He tapped the edge of the stirrer against his chin. I don't know what I should brew first. This deserves something special. Acidic, caustic, sludge, concrete, something to show it off.
You're not going to have an audience,
Pansy said.
I promised myself I'd start on homework today, and unless you let me pick the potion, I doubt you'd brew something I happen to want 2 days in a row.
Malfoy seemed lost in thought. No homemade fire whiskey today. What could I make with bundimum secretion other than cleaning products? I have far better things to do with my time than make soap. Apparently not, Ron muttered under his breath. You could check the potions book you got, Harry said innocently. Maybe your admirer isn't as daft as you think. Malfoy eyed him. I refuse to call anything you say clever, but that isn't the worst idea I've ever heard. Harry rolled his eyes. You're welcome, Malfoy. Malfoy and Goyle arrived at lunch without Pansy and immediately sat with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Are any of you free after lunch? Malfoy asked, rummaging around in his bag for something. They stared at each other. Ron said. I've got homework, Hermione replied. Why? Harry asked. Malfoy pulled out the old potions book and opened it to a bookmark page. It's a recipe for cinnamon galleons. It specifically warns that before it cools, it must be constantly stirred with something impervious to heat lest it melt. And, Harry asked, you need to stir while adding ingredients, Malfoy said. Pansy got a flu call from Blaze, and so she'll be busy for the rest of the day, and Goyle's got homework. You don't? Hermione asked suspiciously. Malfoy sniffed. Nothing more important than this. All you'd need to do is stir while I add a few ingredients. 5 minutes, tops. Malfoy smirked. Malfoy, a bacon for potions help from Gryffindors. I like it. Almost enough to make up for Fancy and one of my brothers. Malfoy flushed slightly. I'll split the candy with whoever helps. Harry, who had no taste for cinnamon candies, asked. 5 minutes for half the galleons? Approximately, yes, Malfoy said, and Harry didn't trust that at all. Nor did he like cinnamon. He sighed valiantly. Fine, but only for the candy. Malfoy grinned at him, and his stomach flipped. After lunch, then? Yeah, whatever, Harry said, trying to sound uninterested. He didn't trust himself to say anything else and had received no kicks from Ron so far, so he focused on his lunch and remained silent for the rest of the meal. Okay, Malfoy said, setting his empty glass down. Potter, you ready to go? Harry glanced at Ron and Hermione and just shrugged. Right, he said. Yeah, let's do this. They started the walk down to the dungeons in silence, but without Ron and Hermione's watchful eyes and Pansy and Goyle, Harry found he didn't have as much of a reason to keep silent. The Weasley twins? He asked. Malfoy groaned. Don't you dare! You're here to help me, that's it! No, I'm here doing you a favor, Harry corrected, which means I get to ask you uncomfortable questions, and I want to hear about the Weasleys. Malfoy quickened his pace, but Harry easily kept up. I don't want to talk about it, he said. Well, I do, Harry replied. He knew he was pushing it, and he couldn't help it. He'd been holding back for too long, and he still couldn't say so many things, and so the things he could say, he was going to say them. Fireworks are all it takes to woo you? Too bad your admirer didn't know that. It wasn't the fireworks, Malfoy muttered. I mean, fine, the fireworks helped. But it was how uninhibited, how they stood for something, so they just did it. In as big and obvious a way as possible. I was raised to be so reserved and held back all the time. A display like that was just... He broke off. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Because I'm making you, Harry said, trying to keep his voice even. Who was it? Fred or George? Fred! Draco said, teeth clenched. For a day! Not even! Part of a day! I'm sure you've never had an embarrassing crush before. Harry chose not to mention his current crush. Nope. Malfoy stared at him. Never! Not once, Harry said, not happy with the way the conversation was going. Pansy had a thing for Snape, eh? I don't want to talk about it, Malfoy said, voice flat. I'm not avoiding. I'd love to embarrass Pansy. I just don't want to talk about Snape. I'm sure you've lost enough people to understand. Harry fell silent. He did know very well, and even if he had still hated Malfoy, he wouldn't have forced him to talk about it. Goyle's still a virgin, Malfoy said suddenly. Harry glanced at him. Is that supposed to be a surprise? Malfoy smiled slightly. Fair enough. I still don't know you anything. You were supposed to be telling me about your embarrassing sex life, not mine or my friends. You know about Fred and Pansy and Goyle. You owe me. If you want to talk about all that, fine. But that doesn't mean I'm going to tell you, Harry said. The nerves were back and this conversation needed to end. Do you have the ingredients for the potion? I gathered them before lunch, Malfoy replied. I wouldn't have demanded assistance, especially yours, if I wasn't positive I could brew it. I can't believe I'm brewing potions for fun, Harry said, with you, of all people, he added, remembering that he should. Then, feeling brave. But hey, in the spirit of the truce, why not you? Malfoy glared at him. Okay, fine, no animosity. He led them into the potions classroom, where there was a cauldron and a pile of ingredients on the table next to it. Malfoy pulled the new stirrer out of his bag with a strange half-smile and set to work preparing. Mind if I do homework? Harry asked, at the table in front of Malfoy's. He twisted himself around so he could see Malfoy. No, it's fine, he replied, not looking up from... Actually, Harry wasn't sure what it was he was preparing, but Malfoy did glance at his new stirrer, again with that half-smile. You really like your stirrer, don't you? Harry asked, feeling very pleased with himself. Malfoy shook himself. It's practical, he said. Then he smiled, a real actual smile. And yes, I do. Thank you very much. Whoever my secret admirer is, they have good taste. It's hard to say how well they know me, because it's hardly a surprise I enjoy high-quality potion tools. But still, I'm actually rather excited to find out who this is, as long as it's not that second year. Harry was getting more and more excited. Merlin, this conversation had a lot of ups and downs. He was starting to think it was entirely possible that he was the second-year fangirl. Even if it's a girl? Malfoy looked up. You do know who it is, don't you? It's obvious Weasley knows, and I figured anything he knows, you do. Don't suppose I could convince you to tell me? No, I don't know. Harry stammered. Neither does Ron, really. Those were just coincidences. Well, you seem to know it's a girl, Malfoy replied. I really don't, Harry insisted. I was just asking about your sexuality, I guess. Malfoy raised an eyebrow, then turned back to his preparations. Whoever it was went through a lot of trouble, and it would be cruel of me not to at least consider it, which I would normally be fine with, but we have that stupid truce, and I promised to be decent. Only to me, Ron and Hermione, Harry pointed out. Treat whoever this is however you want. Malfoy chuckled. I thought I'd stay with this whole Christmas spirit business. Also, Pansy threatened to do unspeakable things to me if I wasn't nice. Harry smiled. I don't suppose I could get you to say that to Ron? He refuses to believe you can be reasonable. This has been discussed enough for you to argue on my behalf? Malfoy asked slightly. Just since we saw that you and your friends were the only ones our year who were staying. Harry lied. He was, not pleased. And you were? He asked in that same tone of voice. All I said is that you're sometimes reasonable. Harry said, don't get cocky. Malfoy smirked. Whatever you say. Harry turned to his desk and got at his homework. He couldn't figure out this conversation, and he was scared of what he would say without the threat of Ron, who kicked very hard. Believe whatever you want, he said, taking out his half-finished Transfiguration essay. I've got homework. And I've got to play with my new toy, Malfoy said. That my secret admirer got me for Christmas. I believe I win. And I believe I won't be stuck doing homework at 3 a.m, the last day of vacation, Harry replied, mentally thanking Hermione for the line. Potter, I need you. A very large ink blot appeared on Harry's parchment. Your hands, I mean. A second ink blot. Divine ingredients! Malfoy snapped. Harry turned around, smiling slightly and forcing the blush away. I thought you needed me to stir. My gift! I'm stirring! Malfoy said. I'll talk you through the ingredients. If you say so, Harry said, standing up and looking over the potion. He jerked back, and the resulting screech of the table legs on the stone floor was drastically unpleasant. Malfoy, that fire is way too high. You're going to burn the castle down. That's how it's supposed to be. That's why I get to play with my new toy, Malfoy replied. Now that white powder over there, it's already on a piece of paper. I need you to pour it in, slowly. As slowly as your bumbling hands can manage. You keep going on about my hands, Harry teased, picking up the paper and slowly letting the powder fall into the cauldron. Do wizards know who Freud is? No, Malfoy replied irritably. You're going too fast. Slow down. Harry was feeling rather hysterical, and it took a lot of energy not to burst out into giggles. Sorry, Harry said, voice strained. He cleared his throat. Sorry. That's better, Malfoy said. Like that. Harry finished pouring the powder and looked up for instructions, which was a mistake. The flame from the cauldron was extraordinarily high and bright, and Malfoy's eyes were doing that sparkling thing again. His mind started to melt, and all he could think of were words for how they looked. Gray was too simple. Steel was too hard. Slate implied a hint of blue when there wasn't one. Clouds on a rainy day was too sad. So the purple vial next, Malfoy said. Over there, in 3 stirs, dump the whole thing in. Harry was having a lot of trouble looking away. The color of the black lake when it was iced over. That was close. Potter, that's 2 stirs now, Malfoy said. What are you doing? The gray cat, that was close. He was cat-like, the way he was slinky and elegant and mysterious and kind of a jerk. 1 more stir, Malfoy said. Why are you playing with me? Gray smoke, that was it, exactly that. Potter, Malfoy yelled. Now, purple vial, all of it. Harry jumped. He grabbed the vial, nearly knocking it over, and dumped it in. The potion sizzled, letting off a gray smoke, which wasn't funny at all, and Malfoy reached across with his free hand and smacked his head. What's wrong with you? He snapped. A purple vial, 3 stirs. No wonder you're failing potions. I'm not failing, Harry muttered, turning away and raking a hand through his hair. That was inexcusable. Really, really not okay. He turned back. What next? Malfoy's eyes were narrowed. Angry smoke. Harry didn't even know that existed. The real question is whether or not I can trust you to follow even the simplest of directions. Of course I can, Harry said, leaving out the probably part. Just tell me. Malfoy continued to study him. Then he jerked his head towards the cutting board. The shaved cinnamon bark is next. Not for a full minute, though. I'll tell you when to add it, if you think you can listen. I'm fine, Harry said irritably, picking up the piece of paper in preparation. So are we just going to ignore the fact that you just got lost in my eyes? Malfoy asked, smirking. You're delusional, Harry said firmly. The secret admirer thing is going to your head. Then what did happen? Malfoy asked. I zoned out, that's all, Harry replied. Don't tell me you've never gotten distracted before. Of course I have, Malfoy replied. But not while staring into someone else's eyes, not unless I'm attracted to them. And really not even then. That's pathetic. I told you, it had nothing to do with you, Harry snapped. Cinnamon bark, Malfoy interrupted. Add it smoothly. Not slowly, but steadily. He poured the cinnamon in. The flames blazed out, the potion turned a bright, dangerous red. The smell of cinnamon flared up so strongly he sneezed several times and his eyes watered. What was that? He asked, wiping at his eyes. Yeah, Malfoy said, then coughed. Go back to your homework, I need to stir. Right, Harry said, still wiping his eyes. So that's not going to happen. My eyes won't stop watering and I can't see. I told you the potion is caustic, Malfoy said, and Harry saw his eyes were bloodshot and shiny with unshed tears. You can go, I can do the rest on my own. I don't want your friends thinking I've made you cry. Harry glared at him. You said you needed help, and I told you I would. I'm not going to back out. I have to stir for a half hour, and then add that red stuff over there, he said, blinking repeatedly. I can make it work, there's no point in you staying. Are you sure? Harry asked. I'm letting you boss me around as much as you want, and you're telling me to leave. We shall never speak of that sentence again, Malfoy said. But yes, go, I'll bring you the candy at dinner. All right then, Harry said, gathering his things. I'll see you at dinner. Harry didn't say anything when he met up with Ron and Hermione in the library. Instead, he sat down, took out his paper, and went back to work. His eyes didn't stop watering for a good 10 minutes, and he was aware that he probably looked like he was crying, but he couldn't think of what else to say. Malfoy was nice to him. They wouldn't believe that. He had accidentally made a complete arse out of himself. That was believable, but he wasn't ready to admit it yet. Malfoy had an open mind regarding his secret admirer and was willing to give whoever it was a chance. That he wasn't willing to admit to himself yet. He was afraid it would go to his head, and in fact had a suspicion it already had, given how idiotic he had been. He finished his essay a few minutes before they had to leave for dinner. He put his things away and relaxed for a moment, gathering the courage to spend another meal with Malfoy. It would be fine, as long as he didn't look at his eyes, or think about them, or any of those things. Fine. It would be fine. It was the cinnamon, by the way, Harry said suddenly, why I was tearing up. I wasn't crying. I don't expect you to believe me, but just so you know, it was cinnamon. I know, Hermione said calmly. Your eyes are still bloodshot, and it's been almost an hour. If you had been crying, your eyes would be puffy but white, and you'd still be sniffling. I'm kind of curious why you didn't share that information right away, but I assumed you'd tell us eventually. It was fine, Harry said, which wasn't exactly untrue. It balanced out to fine. I did homework until he needed me, and then I added some stuff I didn't recognize, and then I left. He's bringing me my share of the candy at dinner. He had more stirring to do. Speaking of dinner, Ron said, closing his book, I'm starved. They didn't sit with Malfoy, Pansy, and Goyle at dinner. The Ravenclaws arrived after they did, and before the Slytherins, leaving no room for them. Harry didn't realize the ramifications of this until Malfoy suddenly appeared right next to him, leaning an elbow on the table and holding out a paper bag. His face was only a few inches away from Harry's. He still smelled like cinnamon, and his eyes were still red. You're half, he said, and his voice had a bit of a scratch to it. Not a word about how I look or sound. Pansy's been informing me the whole way up. No, you're fine, Harry stammered, taking the bag. I mean, you know, cinnamon. Your eyes are still red too, Malfoy said, not moving from his position. That potion may not have been a good idea. The cinnamon dollars are incredible, though. I sampled one on the way up. They didn't dissolve your mouth? Harry asked, which he was legitimately concerned about. Malfoy stuck out his tongue, moving it from side to side and up and down, and he was really close, and this was not okay. Still intact, he said with a small smirk. So kind of you to ask. Then he was gone, and Harry slowly remembered how to beat his heart and work his lungs, and eventually returned to eating. You know how you looked then, right? Ron asked. I would have kicked you, but I was enjoying myself too much. Shut up.